The setting sun painted the Dakota Territory sky in hues of crimson and gold as Katherine Armstrong gripped the frayed edges of her shawl, trying to still her trembling hands. The year was 1873, and her world had shattered the moment her father's gambling debts claimed not only their modest homestead, but her freedom as well. Standing on the auction block in Central City, she felt dozens of eyes crawling over her skin like insects, appraising her worth with cold calculation. $500 for the girl, announced the auctioneer, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth. Educated, can read and write, good for housekeeping or other purposes. Katherine fought back tears, refusing to give these vultures the satisfaction. At 20 years old, she had dreams beyond this dusty frontier town, dreams of teaching, of independence, of a life determined by her own choices. Now she stood like cattle at market, her fate sealed by her father's final, desperate wager. A murmur rippled through the crowd as a man stepped forward. Even before he spoke, Katherine felt a chill race down her spine. Lyle Blackburn was infamous throughout the territory, a cattle baron with a reputation for brutality who owned the largest ranch outside Central City. The blood on his hands was both literal and figurative rumor. Had it, he'd killed 3 men in disputes over land and water rights. 600, Blackburn said, his voice carrying the casual confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. 700, another voice countered. Katherine's gaze swung toward the challenger. Tall and broad-shouldered, he stood apart from the crowd, one hand resting casually on his gun belt. His face was partially shadowed by the brim of his hat, but she could see the hard set of his jaw, the intensity of his steel blue eyes as they met hers briefly before returning to Blackburn. 800, Blackburn countered, irritation creeping into his tone. $1,000, the stranger replied without hesitation. The auctioneer's eyes widened. We have 1,000 from Mr. Layton. Blackburn's face darkened with rage. You're overstepping, Layton. The man Layton merely shrugged. It's an open auction, Blackburn. Katherine watched the exchange with growing dread. Being sold to Blackburn would be a nightmare. But who was this stranger? What did he want with her? His expression revealed nothing. 1,500, Blackburn snarled. 2,000, Layton countered instantly. The crowd gasped. $2,000 was an outrageous sum, more than most men in the territory earned in years. Blackburn's hand drifted toward his pistol. You trying to make a fool of me, Layton? Just making a purchase. Layton's voice remained calm, but Katherine noticed his stance shift slightly, ready for trouble. After a tense moment, Blackburn spat on the ground. She ain't worth it. He turned and stalked away, shoving onlookers aside. Sold! The auctioneer declared, slamming his gavel down. To Mr. Xavier Layton for $2,000. Katherine felt lightheaded as she was led off the platform toward her new owner. Up close, she could see that Layton was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30. With weather-roughened skin that spoke of years under the sun, a thin scar ran along his jawline, disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. He paid the auctioneer without comment, then turned to her, his expression unreadable. Katherine lifted her chin, determined to face whatever came next with dignity. Miss Armstrong, he said quietly, I suggest we leave immediately. She nodded stiffly, following him through the crowd. They had reached his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, when Blackburn's voice rang out behind them. Layton! They turned to see Blackburn approaching with 3 men flanking him. The street cleared quickly as townspeople sensed the brewing confrontation. You've interfered in my business for the last time, Blackburn growled. Layton sighed as if merely inconvenienced. The lady isn't business, Blackburn, and I believe our transaction is complete. I had plans for that girl. I'm sure you did, Layton's voice hardened. Plans that won't come to pass. Katherine saw Blackburn's hand twitch toward his holster, but Layton was faster. In one fluid motion, he positioned himself between her and Blackburn, his coat pulled back to reveal his holstered revolver. You really want to do this here? Now? Layton asked quietly. Something in his tone, a deadly certainty, made Blackburn hesitate. After a tense moment, the cattle baron stepped back. This isn't over, he warned. It never is with you, Layton replied evenly. Once Blackburn and his men had retreated, Layton turned back to Katherine. Can you ride? She nodded. Good. He mounted his horse in one smooth motion, then extended his hand down to her. "You're coming with me instead." Katherine hesitated, looking up at this stranger who had just spent a fortune to purchase her. "Where are we going?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Somewhere safe. That's all you need to know for now." With no real choice, Katherine placed her hand in his and allowed him to pull her up behind him. As the horse carried them out of Central City, she held tightly to Xavier Layton's waist, wondering if she'd just escaped one dangerous man only to fall into the hands of another. They rode hard for nearly an hour, putting distance between themselves and Central City. Katherine's thoughts raced with each hoofbeat, cycling through terror, confusion, and a grudging gratitude that at least she wasn't with Blackburn. The landscape changed gradually from the dusty streets of town to rolling prairie interspersed with stands of cottonwoods and aspen groves. "Are you hurt?" Layton asked, breaking the silence without turning. "No," Katherine replied, her voice carrying barely above the rhythm of the horse's gait. "Good, we'll stop soon. There's a creek ahead where we can rest." True to his word, they crested a small rise to find a creek winding through a protected gully. Layton guided the horse down to the water and dismounted in one fluid motion, then offered his hand to help Katherine down. She hesitated before accepting, determined to keep her wits about her. Her legs were stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Layton steadied her with a hand on her elbow, releasing her immediately when she was stable. "Thank you," she said automatically, then immediately felt foolish for thanking the man who had purchased her like livestock. Layton seemed to read her thoughts. "Miss Armstrong, I need to make something clear. I may have paid for you, but I don't own you." Katherine crossed her arms. "The law would disagree. The law and I have had disagreements before." He unsaddled his horse and led it to the creek to drink. "Are you thirsty? Hungry?" She was both, desperately, but pride kept her from admitting it. Layton seemed to understand anyway. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out jerky and a canteen. "It's not much, but it'll hold you until we reach the ranch." Katherine accepted the food and water cautiously. "Your ranch?" Layton nodded, settling himself on a fallen log. "About another hour's ride from here." She took a small bite of jerky, finding it tough but flavorful. "Why did you buy me, Mr. Layton?" He looked at her directly then, his blue eyes intense. "I have my reasons." That's not an answer. A hint of amusement crossed his face. "No, it's not." He stood and checked his horse. "We should keep moving. Blackburn isn't known for letting things go." Katherine remained where she was. "I'm not moving until you tell me what you want from me." Layton turned back to her, his expression serious. "What I want, Miss Armstrong, is to prevent Lyle Blackburn from adding another victim to his list. I know what he does to women he purchases, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again." "Again?" Something dark flickered in his eyes. 3 years ago, he bought a young woman named Sarah, my friend. I wasn't in town when it happened. By the time I found her..." He stopped, jaw tight. "What happened to her?" Katherine asked, her voice softer now. "She took her own life, after weeks of..." He shook his head. "We need to keep moving." Katherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "So, this is what then? Revenge against Blackburn?" "Call it making amends." Layton offered his hand again. "I promised myself no other woman would suffer Sarah's fate if I could prevent it. Now, please, we need to reach the ranch before dark." This time, Katherine took his hand without hesitation. Whatever Xavier Layton's true motives, she believed he was preferable to Blackburn. As they mounted up and continued their journey, she felt the weight of the day's events pressing down on her. Her father, her home, her future all gone in the space of hours. "What will happen to me at your ranch?" she asked as they rode. "You'll have a safe place to stay while we figure out your next steps," Layton replied. "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Winters. She'll see to your needs. And then? That's up to you, Miss Armstrong. I told you I don't own you." Katherine fell silent, processing his words. Freedom seemed like a distant concept after standing on that auction block. Yet this stranger was offering it back to her, at least according to his words. Whether she could trust those words remained to be seen. The sun was setting when they finally approached a sprawling ranch house nestled at the base of a gently sloping hill. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, Katherine could see cattle grazing. It was larger than she'd expected clearly. Xavier Layton was a man of means. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Short and plump, with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, she regarded them with obvious curiosity. "Mr. Layton," she called. "You're back earlier than expected, and with company, I see." Layton dismounted and helped Katherine down. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Katherine Armstrong. She'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Winters' sharp eyes took in Katherine's worn dress and disheveled appearance. To her credit, she asked no questions. "I'll prepare the guest room," she said simply. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." "Thank you, Mrs. Winters." Layton turned to Katherine. "Mrs. Winters will show you to your room. You can wash up and rest before dinner." Katherine nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by exhaustion. The events of the day had drained her completely. Mrs. Winters guided her into the house, which was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's ranch. The furniture was solid and of good quality, the floors covered with woven rugs. It spoke of comfort rather than luxury, but it was far better than Katherine had expected. "Here we are," Mrs. Winters said, opening a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a large window overlooking the prairie. "There's water for washing, and I'll bring up some fresh clothes. They'll be simple, just some of my daughter's things she left behind, but they'll do until we can get you properly outfitted." "Thank you," Katherine said sincerely. "This is very kind." Mrs. Winters paused at the door. "Mr. Layton is a good man, Miss Armstrong. Whatever circumstances brought you here, you're safe now." With that, she left Katherine alone. Standing in the middle of the clean, comfortable room, Katherine finally allowed herself to cry for her father, for herself, and for the uncertain future that stretched before her. By the time Katherine had washed her face and changed into the borrowed dress, a simple blue cotton garment that fit reasonably well, she felt more composed. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, following the scent of cooking food. She found the kitchen easily enough. Mrs. Winters was bustling around a large cast-iron stove, while Layton sat at the table, examining papers. He looked up when she entered, quickly gathering the documents into a neat pile. "Miss Armstrong," he acknowledged, standing. "I trust the accommodations are suitable?" "Yes, thank you." She hovered uncertainly in the doorway. "Please, sit." He gestured to a chair. "Mrs. Winters has prepared quite a meal." Indeed, the housekeeper was placing bowls of steaming food on the table, roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, and green beans. Katherine's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she'd eaten almost nothing all day. The jerky Layton had given her earlier had barely taken the edge off her hunger. "Don't stand on ceremony," Mrs. Winters said, noticing Katherine's hesitation. "Eat while it's hot." The three of them sat down to eat, an oddly domestic scene that felt surreal after the day's events. Katherine tried to eat slowly, with dignity, but her hunger won out. The food was simple but delicious, and she found herself accepting seconds when Mrs. Winters offered. "You've had a difficult day," Layton observed quietly. "Perhaps after dinner, Mrs. Winters can show you to the library. We have quite a collection of books. I understand you can read?" Katherine nodded. "My mother was a school teacher before she married. She taught me." "And your father?" The question was casual, but Katherine tensed nonetheless. "A dreamer," she said after a moment. "Always chasing the next opportunity, the next fortune. We moved often." She looked down at her plate. "He wasn't a bad man, just reckless." "And his recklessness led to today's events," Layton concluded. Katherine met his gaze. "He made a poor wager, against Mr. Blackburn as it happens. When he couldn't pay, Blackburn took you as payment," Layton finished, his expression darkening, "and then decided to auction you publicly." "Yes?" Katherine's grip tightened on her fork. "My father didn't live to see it. He took his own life when he realized what he'd done." The kitchen fell silent. Mrs. Winters made a small sound of distress, while Layton's face remained carefully neutral. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said finally. Katherine nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. After dinner, true to his word, Layton showed Katherine to a cozy library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with books of all kinds. A comfortable-looking armchair sat near the window, positioned to catch the natural light. "Feel free to borrow anything that interests you," Layton said. I'll be in my study if you need me." Left alone, Katherine explored the shelves with growing wonder. There were novels, poetry collections, historical accounts, scientific texts, far more books than she'd ever seen outside of a proper city bookshop. She selected a volume of poetry and settled into the chair, trying to lose herself in the verses. But her mind kept returning to Xavier Layton. Who was this rancher who spent thousands to rescue her, who lived in a house filled with books, who spoke with the education of an Easterner despite his frontier demeanor? And what did he truly want from her? As darkness fell outside, Katherine realized she was too exhausted to focus on reading. She returned the book to its shelf and made her way upstairs to the guest room, where she found a nightgown laid out on the bed. Within minutes of changing and sliding between the clean sheets, she was asleep. Her dreams were chaotic. Her father's desperate face, Blackburn's cold eyes, the auction block, and throughout it all, Xavier Layton watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. Katherine woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she was disoriented, expecting to see the familiar walls of the small bedroom she'd shared with her father. Reality crashed back quickly. Her father was dead, her home gone, and she was in the house of a stranger who had bought her freedom for reasons still not entirely clear. A knock at the door roused her fully. "Miss Armstrong?" Mrs. Winters called. "Breakfast will be ready soon. I've left some clothes outside your door that might fit you better." "Thank you," Katherine replied, climbing out of bed. The clothes proved to be a simple but well-made skirt and blouse, along with undergarments and sturdy boots. Everything fit reasonably well, though the skirt was a bit short, revealing her ankles. Katherine dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. She found Layton already at the breakfast table, drinking coffee and reading a newspaper. He looked up when she entered, nodding in greeting. "Good morning, Miss Armstrong. I trust you slept well?" "Yes, thank you." She sat across from him, accepting the cup of coffee Mrs. Winters poured for her. "I have business in town today," Layton said after a moment. "Mrs. Winters will be here, of course, but I wanted to warn you it's best if you stay close to the house. Blackburn has eyes everywhere." Katherine's hands tightened around her cup. "Do you think he'll come here?" "Not directly. He knows better than to trespass on my land." Layton folded his newspaper precisely. "But I wouldn't put it past him to have someone watching the property." Mrs. Winters placed plates of eggs and bacon before them. "No one will bother Miss Armstrong while I'm here," she declared firmly. Layton smiled slightly. "I don't doubt that, Mrs. Winters." After breakfast, Layton prepared to leave for town. Katherine followed him to the front porch, suddenly anxious at the thought of his departure. "Mr. Layton," she began, unsure how to express her concerns. He turned to her, already mounted on his horse. "Yes?" Thank you, for yesterday." His expression softened slightly. "No thanks necessary, Miss Armstrong." "Will you explain more when you return, about why you did it?" Layton studied her for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "You deserve that much." With a tip of his hat, he rode away. Katherine watched until he disappeared from sight, then turned back to the house, determined to make herself useful rather than wallow in uncertainty. She found Mrs. Winters in the kitchen, kneading bread dough. "Can I help with anything?" Katherine offered. The housekeeper looked surprised, but pleased. "I wouldn't say no to an extra pair of hands. Do you know how to bake?" "My mother taught me the basics before she passed." "Then you can help me with these pies. The apples need peeling." They worked together companionably, and Katherine found comfort in the familiar domestic tasks. As they worked, Mrs. Winters shared bits of information about the ranch and its owner. "Mr. Layton came out here about 5 years ago," she explained, rolling out pie crust. "Built this place from nothing. Works harder than any man I've ever seen." "Where did he come from?" Katherine asked, carefully peeling an apple. "Back east somewhere, Boston, I believe. He doesn't talk much about it." Mrs. Winters checked the oven temperature. "Lost his wife and child to fever before he came west. I think he was looking for a fresh start." Katherine absorbed this information silently. It explained the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in Layton's eyes. "And Sarah?" she asked cautiously. "He mentioned a friend named Sarah who died." Mrs. Winters' hands stilled. "Ah, he told you about her?" "A little. He said Blackburn purchased her." The older woman sighed. "Sarah Miller, sweet girl. Worked at the hotel in Central City. Her father died owing money to Blackburn. Sound familiar? Blackburn took her as payment, just like he tried with you. Mrs. Winters shook her head. Mr. Layton was away selling cattle. By the time he returned and found out what happened, it was too late. He found her, you know. After she... Well, Katherine felt sick. They were close? He was fond of her. I don't know that it was love, exactly, but he blamed himself for not being there to help her. It changed him. Mrs. Winters placed a comforting hand on Katherine's arm. That's why he couldn't stand by yesterday. He saw a chance to stop history from repeating itself. The rest of the day passed quietly. Katherine helped Mrs. Winters with household tasks, explored the garden, and spent time in the library. By late afternoon, she found herself watching the road, anxious for Layton's return. It was nearly sunset when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She was on the porch instantly, relief flooding through her at the sight of Layton riding toward the house. But as he came closer, she realized something was wrong. He was slumped in the saddle, one hand pressed to his side. "Mr. Layton!" she called, rushing down the steps. He dismounted slowly, grimacing in pain. "Miss Armstrong, I see you've been keeping watch." "You're hurt," she said, noticing dark stains on his shirt. "It's nothing serious." He tried to wave off her concern, but swayed slightly. Katherine moved to his side, supporting him with her shoulder. "Mrs. Winters!" she called. "Mr. Layton is injured." The housekeeper appeared instantly, taking in the situation with one glance. "Bring him to the kitchen. I'll get my supplies." Together, they helped Layton into the house. In the kitchen, Katherine helped him remove his coat and shirt, revealing an ugly gash along his ribs. "Knife wound," he explained through gritted teeth. Blackburn sent one of his men to deliver a message. Mrs. Winters returned with bandages and medicines. The message being that he's still angry, I suppose. Something like that. Layton winced as the housekeeper began cleaning the wound. "Who did this?" Katherine asked, holding cloths ready to hand to Mrs. Winters. "A man named Tucker, one of Blackburn's hired guns." Layton's eyes met hers. "He mentioned you specifically, said Blackburn hasn't forgotten." Katherine felt cold fear spreading through her. "This is my fault." "No," Layton said sharply. "This is Blackburn's doing, not yours. Never think otherwise." Mrs. Winters finished bandaging the wound. "It's not too deep, thank the Lord, but you'll need to rest. No riding for a few days." Layton nodded resignedly. "Thank you, Mrs. Winters. I'll bring you both some dinner in the study. Miss Armstrong, help him there, would you?" Katherine supported Layton as they made their way to his study, a comfortable room with a large desk and several leather chairs. Once he was seated, she hovered uncertainly. "You can sit, Miss Armstrong. I don't bite." She sat across from him, studying his pale face. "You could have been killed. Tucker's not that good with a knife, fortunately." He shifted, wincing slightly. "I suppose I owe you that explanation now. About why you helped me." "Yes." Layton leaned back carefully in his chair. "Part of it you already know about Sarah, but there's more to it than that." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I came west to escape my past, Miss Armstrong. In Boston, I was a different man. Xavier Layton, respected businessman, husband, father. Then the fever took my wife and son in the span of a week." Katherine's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry. After their deaths, I lost myself for a time, made poor decisions, got involved with people I shouldn't have." His eyes took on a distant look. "When I finally came to my senses, I decided to start over, came west, built this place, tried to be a better man. And then Sarah died." "And then Sarah died," he agreed softly. "Another failure, another person I couldn't save." His gaze returned to Katherine. "So when I saw you on that auction block, looking so determined despite everything, I couldn't walk away, not again." Katherine sat silently, absorbing his words. There was sincerity in his voice, in his eyes. "So what happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on you. You're free to go wherever you wish. I can arrange transportation to the nearest city, provide you with enough money to make a new start." The offer was generous, more than generous. It was everything Katherine should want, yet the thought of leaving filled her with unexpected sadness. And if I wanted to stay, just until I figure things out? Something flickered in Layton's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something warmer. Then you'd be welcome, he said simply. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Winters bringing dinner. As they ate, Katherine found herself studying Layton with new understanding. He was a man carrying deep wounds, trying to atone for perceived failures. His rescue of her had been impulsive, perhaps, but rooted in genuine compassion. For the first time since the auction, Katherine felt something other than fear or uncertainty. She felt hope. The next several days established a routine. Layton's injury kept him close to the house, giving Katherine the opportunity to learn more about him and the ranch. She discovered he was well-read and knowledgeable on a surprising range of topics, from literature to agriculture. Their conversations over meals and in the evenings grew increasingly easy, punctuated by occasional debates that Katherine found both challenging and enjoyable. She also made herself useful around the ranch, helping Mrs. Winters with household tasks and even learning about the accounts from Layton. Her mother's teachings had included figures and basic bookkeeping, skills that proved valuable as she helped organize the ranch ledgers. "You have a good head for numbers," Layton commented one afternoon as they worked in his study. "My mother insisted I learn practical skills," Katherine replied, carefully recording cattle sales in the ledger. "She said a woman should always be able to manage her own affairs." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Katherine smiled at the memory. "She would have liked your library. She always said books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise." Layton's expression softened. "My wife used to say something similar." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife, without pain shadowing his features. Katherine took it as a small victory. Outside the safety of the ranch, however, tensions were building. News reached them through ranch hands and Mrs. Winters' trips to town that Blackburn was making threats against Layton, claiming he'd stolen what rightfully belonged to him. The knife attack, it seemed, was just the beginning. "He won't stop," Layton said grimly one evening as they sat in the library. His wound was healing well, but Katherine noticed he still moved carefully. Blackburn's pride won't let him. "What will you do?" she asked, setting aside her book. "What I've always done, stand my ground." He met her concerned gaze. "But I'm worried about you. If Blackburn gets desperate enough—" "I'm not leaving," Katherine said firmly. "Katherine, no." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the first time she'd directly refused him. "I won't be driven away by fear. This is as much my fight as yours now." Layton studied her for a long moment. "You're a remarkable woman, Katherine Armstrong." The way he said her name sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm just stubborn," she replied, trying to lighten the moment. "Stubborn can be remarkable." A smile touched his lips, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his features. Katherine found herself smiling back, suddenly aware of the shifting nature of their relationship. What had begun as rescuer and rescued was becoming something else entirely, something based on mutual respect and growing affection. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Winters entered, her expression troubled. "Mr. Layton, Tom just rode in from town. There's news you should hear." Layton straightened. "What is it?" Blackburn's gathered a group of men. Tom overheard them talking at the saloon. "They're planning to raid the ranch tomorrow night." Katherine felt her blood run cold. Layton's face hardened into the expression she remembered from the auction, determined, dangerous. "How many men?" Tom counted at least 12, including Tucker and the Miller brothers. "Blackburn's bringing his best guns, then." Layton stood, wincing slightly. "Tell the men to prepare. We'll be ready for them." After Mrs. Winters left, Katherine rose as well. 12 armed men, Xavier. That's not a fight you can win." "I've faced worse odds." He began pacing, his mind clearly working through strategies. "This is madness," Katherine insisted. "If it's me they want, perhaps I should—" "Don't even suggest it," Layton cut her off, his voice sharp. "I didn't save you from Blackburn just to hand you back when things got difficult. I won't have men dying because of me. They'll be dying because of Blackburn's wounded pride and my refusal to bow to it." Layton stopped pacing, his expression softening as he looked at her. "Katherine, I promise you I won't let anything happen to you, not while I have breath in my body." The intensity of his words, the protective fierceness in his eyes, stirred something deep within her. Without thinking, Katherine closed the distance between them and placed her hand on his arm. "I don't want anything to happen to you either," she admitted softly. Layton's gaze dropped to her hand, then returned to her face. For a moment, Katherine thought he might pull away, or perhaps draw her closer. Instead, he covered her hand with his own. "Then we'll protect each other," he said quietly. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Layton stepped back, his expression turning businesslike once more. "We need to prepare. Tomorrow will come quickly." The next day was a flurry of activity as the ranch prepared for the impending attack. Layton's men, 8 trusted cowboys who had been with him for years, moved livestock to distant pastures and fortified the main house and barn. Rifles and ammunition were distributed, positions assigned. Through it all, Katherine worked alongside Mrs. Winters, preparing food, bandages, and anything else that might be needed. As evening approached, tension hung in the air like an approaching storm. Layton found Katherine in the kitchen, packing supplies for the men stationed in the barn. "Katherine," he said quietly, "may I speak with you?" She followed him to his study, noting the gun belt now strapped to his hips and the rifle leaning against his desk. "When the shooting starts, I want you and Mrs. Winters in the root cellar," he said without preamble. "It's the safest place on the property." Katherine had been expecting this. "Mrs. Winters has already agreed to go there. I'll be staying upstairs." Layton's brow furrowed. "That's not safe." "I can shoot, Xavier." When he looked skeptical, she added, "My father taught me. We lived alone on the frontier for years. I know how to handle a rifle." "This isn't hunting, Katherine. These are men who won't hesitate to kill you. All the more reason I should help defend this home." She met his gaze steadily. "You can't spare a man to guard me in the cellar, and I refuse to hide while others fight on my behalf." Layton looked like he wanted to argue further, but something in her expression must have convinced him of her resolve. "Very well," he conceded, "but you stay in the house, upstairs, away from windows. You only shoot if someone breaks in. Understood?" Katherine nodded, relieved he wasn't going to force the issue. "Understood." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the coming night heavy between them. "Katherine," Layton began, his voice softer now, "if anything happens to me—" "Don't," she interrupted. "Nothing will happen to you." He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gentle gesture contrasted sharply with the grim circumstances. "Just in case," he continued. "If anything happens, there are papers in my desk, the top right drawer. They'll ensure you're taken care of." Katherine felt tears threatening. "I don't want your money or your property, Xavier. I want—" She stopped, suddenly aware of how her words might sound. "What do you want, Katherine?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Before she could answer, shots rang out in the distance, the warning signal from one of the men posted as lookouts. The moment shattered, as Layton immediately shifted back into the role of protector and commander. "They're here earlier than expected," he said, grabbing his rifle. "Get upstairs now. Stay away from windows." Katherine nodded, her heart pounding as she hurried to her position. From one of the back bedrooms, she could hear men shouting, horses neighing, and then the sharp crack of gunfire. She clutched the rifle Layton had given her earlier, praying she wouldn't need to use it. The attack was chaotic and vicious. From her vantage point, Katherine could see figures moving in the gathering darkness, muzzle flashes illuminating brief tableaus of violence. She recognized Blackburn's distinctive white horse as he directed his men from a distance, a coward's position. Downstairs, she could hear Layton shouting orders to his men. The ranch hands were well positioned and disciplined, making each shot count against the larger force. For a time, it seemed the defense might hold. Then Katherine heard glass breaking downstairs, followed by a triumphant shout. Someone had breached the house. Without hesitation, she moved to the hallway, rifle ready. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Katherine steadied her breathing, taking aim at the top of the staircase. When an unfamiliar man appeared, gun drawn, she fired. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but her aim was true. The intruder fell, tumbling back down the stairs. More gunfire erupted outside, intensifying. Katherine heard Layton's voice calling her name, panic evident in his tone. Before she could respond, another figure appeared at the top of the stairs. Tucker, the man who had wounded Layton. "Well, well," he sneered, raising his pistol. "The boss will be pleased when I bring you out." Katherine fired again, but her shot went wide as Tucker dove to the side. In the confined space of the hallway, they faced each other, her empty rifle against his loaded pistol. "Drop it, girl," he ordered. "Blackburn wants you alive, but he didn't say undamaged." Katherine's mind raced. The rifle was empty. But Tucker didn't know that. She kept it pointed at him, backing slowly toward the window at the end of the hall. "If you shoot me, you'll bring every man on this ranch down on you," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. Tucker laughed. "Your protector's a bit busy at the moment, sweetheart." A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Tucker's gun. The outlaw's face registered surprise, then pain as he crumpled to the floor. Behind him stood Xavier Layton, his pistol still raised. "Katherine!" He rushed to her side, eyes quickly assessing for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine." Relief made her voice shake. "But downstairs, my men have it under control. Blackburn's retreating." Layton holstered his gun and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "When I heard the shot up here, I thought—" He didn't finish the sentence, just held her tighter. Katherine returned the embrace, burying her face against his chest. The steady beat of his heart was the most reassuring sound she'd ever heard. "I was so afraid for you," she whispered. Layton pulled back slightly, looking down at her with an expression of wonder and something deeper. Without words, he lowered his head and kissed her gently at first, then with growing intensity as Katherine responded. In that moment, the gunfire and danger seemed distant, eclipsed by the realization of feelings that had been building since that first day at the auction. When they finally separated, both breathless, Layton pressed his forehead to hers. "I never expected this," he admitted softly. "Never expected you." "Nor I you," Katherine replied, a smile touching her lips despite the circumstances. The moment was interrupted by shouts from outside. Layton tensed, his protective instincts immediately reasserting themselves. "Stay here," he ordered, drawing his pistol once more. "This isn't over yet." Katherine watched him hurry back downstairs, her heart racing for new reasons. Despite the danger still surrounding them, she felt a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. Whatever happened next, she and Xavier would face it together. The remainder of the night passed in tense vigilance. Blackburn and his surviving men had retreated, but no one at the ranch believed they would simply give up. 2 of Layton's men had been wounded, one seriously, and Mrs. Winters was tending to them in the kitchen. Katherine assisted, grateful for the distraction from her churning emotions. Layton moved between the house and the perimeter, checking on his men and reinforcing vulnerable points. Each time he passed through the kitchen, his eyes sought Katherine's, the brief contact reassuring them both that the other was safe. Near dawn, when no further attack had materialized, Layton finally called his men to rest in shifts. He found Katherine in the kitchen, exhausted but still helping Mrs. Winters change bandages. "You should rest," he said quietly, touching her shoulder. She looked up at him, noting the fatigue lining his face, the smudges of gunpowder on his skin. "So should you." Mrs. Winters snorted softly. "Both of you should rest. I can manage here." Layton nodded, too tired to argue. 2 hours, then we need to prepare for their return." "You think they'll come back today?" Katherine asked as they walked from the kitchen. "Not today. Blackburn will be licking his wounds, regrouping, but he'll come back with more men next time." Layton stopped at the foot of the stairs, turning to face her. "Katherine, about what happened earlier." "You mean when you kissed me?" A slight smile touched her lips despite the gravity of their situation. An answering smile briefly lightened his features. "Yes, that." "Do you regret it?" "No," he said immediately, "but the timing was impulsive." "I'm glad you were impulsive." Katherine reached up to touch his face gently. "Life is too uncertain to wait for perfect timing." Layton captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Get some rest. We'll talk more later." Katherine nodded and climbed the stairs to her room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was elusive as her mind replayed the events of the night, both the terrifying and the wonderful. 2 hours later, she rejoined the household, finding Layton in conference with his foreman in the study. They were discussing options for securing the ranch against a larger attack. "We need more men," the foreman was saying as Katherine entered. "If Blackburn comes back with 20 or 30 guns—" Layton nodded grimly. "I've sent riders to neighboring ranches. The Johnsons and the Clarks both have grievances against Blackburn. They might be willing to help." "And the marshal?" Katherine asked. Both men looked up, acknowledging her presence. "Marshal Davis is conveniently visiting his sister in Bismarck," Layton replied, his tone bitter. "Blackburn's gold ensures his absences coincide with Blackburn's activities." "Then we need to take the fight to Blackburn," Katherine said firmly, "not wait for him to attack again." Layton's foreman looked at her with new respect. "The lady has a point, boss." "It's too dangerous," Layton objected. "Blackburn's ranch is a fortress, and he has at least 20 men there at all times." "But he doesn't expect us to attack," Katherine pointed out. "The element of surprise would be on our side." Layton studied her thoughtfully. "You continue to surprise me, Katherine Armstrong. Is that a good thing?" "It's a remarkable thing." He turned back to his foreman. "Tom, see about getting those reinforcements. I need to think about our next move." After Tom left, Layton motioned for Katherine to sit. "You understand that Blackburn won't stop until he has you or I'm dead?" She nodded solemnly. "I know. That's why we can't just defend. We need to end this." "We?" Layton raised an eyebrow. "Yes, we." Katherine met his gaze steadily. "I'm as involved in this as you are." Layton leaned back in his chair, a mix of admiration and concern in his expression. "When I first saw you on that auction block, I thought I was saving a damsel in distress. I'm beginning to think you might have saved me instead." "Perhaps we've saved each other," Katherine suggested softly. Their conversation was interrupted by a ranch hand bursting into the study. "Mr. Layton, riders coming, but it's not Blackburn. It's Johnson and his men." Relief spread across Layton's features. "How many?" 15, maybe more." "Good man." "See that they're welcomed." The arrival of neighboring ranchers brought new hope to Layton's beleaguered ranch. By nightfall, nearly 30 additional men had arrived, all bearing grudges against Blackburn and eager for a chance to stand against him. A strategy session lasted well into the night. Katherine insisted on participating, her quick mind and fresh perspective earning respect from even the most traditional of the ranchers. The plan they developed was bold, but calculated a coordinated attack on Blackburn's ranch that would catch him unprepared and force a resolution. "We move tomorrow night," Layton announced as the meeting concluded. "Blackburn won't expect us to strike first." As the ranchers dispersed to rest before the coming confrontation, Layton pulled Katherine aside. "I want you to stay here during the attack," he said quietly. She had been expecting this. "No, Katherine. I'm going, Xavier. This began with me. I need to see it end." Layton's jaw tightened. "It's too dangerous." "Life is dangerous," she countered, "especially loving someone like you." The words hung between them, an admission neither had quite made until now. Layton's expression softened. "Katherine," he breathed, reaching for her hand. "I can't risk losing you, not now that I've found you. And I can't stay behind wondering if you'll return." She stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest. "We face this together. That's my condition." Layton searched her face, seeing the determination there. Finally, he nodded. "Together, then. But you stay with me, always in sight. Promise me." "I promise," she agreed. He sealed the promise with a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't fear, hope, and a love that had blossomed unexpectedly from the most unlikely beginning. The next day passed in careful preparation. Weapons were cleaned, horses readied, plans reviewed. By dusk, the combined force was prepared to ride. Katherine, dressed in men's clothing borrowed from one of the smaller ranch hands, mounted her horse alongside Layton. He gave her a sidelong glance that mixed admiration with lingering concern. "Stay close," he reminded her. "Always," she replied. They rode through the gathering darkness, a determined company united by common purpose. Blackburn's ranch lay 20 miles to the east, a journey of several hours at a careful pace. They approached from multiple directions, communicating with bird calls as they surrounded the property. From their position on a ridge overlooking the ranch, Katherine and Layton could see lanterns illuminating the main house and bunkhouse. Men moved about, unsuspecting of the force gathered around them. "Ready?" Layton asked quietly, not just to Katherine, but to the men nearby. Nods answered him. The signal 3 quick shots came from the eastern approach. Immediately, riders burst from cover, converging on the ranch from all sides. Shouts of alarm rose from Blackburn's men, followed quickly by gunfire. Katherine stayed close to Layton as they rode toward the main house. Their specific target was Blackburn himself, the head of the snake. Around them, chaos erupted as Blackburn's surprised men scrambled to defend against the unexpected assault. They reached the house and dismounted, Layton covering Katherine as they moved toward the door. It burst open before they reached it, Blackburn himself emerging with a shotgun in his hands. His eyes widened at the sight of Layton, and then narrowed when he saw Katherine. "Should have known you'd bring your woman to hide behind, Layton," he snarled. "It's over, Blackburn," Layton replied calmly, his pistol trained on the cattle baron. "Your men are outnumbered. Surrender now, and no one else has to die." Blackburn laughed harshly. "Surrender? To you? I built this territory while you were still playing gentleman back east." "And you've terrorized it long enough," Katherine said, stepping forward despite Layton's protective arm. "How many women have you bought and broken? How many men have died because they stood in your way? You've got spirit, girl. I can see why Layton wants to keep you." Blackburn's eyes gleamed with malice. "But he can't protect you forever." "He doesn't have to," Katherine replied steadily. "I can protect myself." As if to punctuate her words, gunfire erupted nearby, one of Blackburn's men attempting to flank them. Katherine reacted instantly, drawing the small pistol Layton had given her and firing. Her shot went wide, but it forced the attacker to dive for cover, giving Layton time to adjust his aim and fire more accurately. The man fell with a cry. Blackburn used the distraction to raise his shotgun, but Layton was faster. His bullet caught Blackburn in the shoulder, spinning the older man around and sending the shotgun clattering to the ground. Cursing, Blackburn fumbled for a pistol at his belt with his good arm. Katherine didn't hesitate. She fired again, her shot striking Blackburn's hand. He howled in pain, dropping to his knees as blood poured from his ruined fingers. Layton approached cautiously, his gun still trained on Blackburn. "It's over," he repeated. "Your reign ends tonight." Around them, the shooting was dying down as Blackburn's outnumbered men surrendered or fled. Several neighboring ranchers approached, their expressions grim but satisfied at the sight of Blackburn defeated. "What now?" one of them asked, the marshals still conveniently absent. "We take him to the territorial governor," Layton decided. "With all of us as witnesses to his crimes, even Blackburn's money won't save him." Katherine watched as Blackburn was bound and placed on a horse, his face a mask of hatred and pain. The man who had terrorized her, who had caused so much suffering, suddenly seemed diminished, just a bitter old man whose power had finally been broken. Layton appeared at her side, gently taking the pistol from her hand. "Are you all right?" She nodded, suddenly exhausted as the tension of the night drained away. "Is it really over?" "Yes," he assured her, pulling her close. "Blackburn's finished. Between the testimonies we can gather from the people he's wronged, he'll spend the rest of his life in prison." Katherine leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "What happens now? For us?" Layton tilted her face up to his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "That depends on you, Katherine. I know what I want, what I never thought I'd want again after losing my family. But I need to know what you want." "I want to stay," she said simply, "with you, building something that matters." "It won't be easy," he warned. "The territory is still wild, still dangerous." Katherine smiled up at him. "I've never been afraid of challenges, Xavier, especially ones worth fighting for." Around them, men were organizing, preparing to transport Blackburn and care for the wounded. Dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, symbolic of the new beginning stretching before them. Layton kissed her then, beneath the fading stars and watchful eyes of their allies, a declaration and a promise wrapped in one tender gesture. "Let's go home," he said when they parted. Home. The word resonated in Katherine's heart. From the auction block to this moment, her journey had been unexpected and fraught with danger. Yet somehow, Against all odds, she had found not just safety, but love, purpose, and the promise of a future brighter than any she could have imagined. As they rode back toward the Layton ranch, Katherine reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her here. Her father's final, devastating mistake had set her on a path that, despite its painful beginning, had led to Xavier Layton and a chance at happiness she'd thought forever lost. The journey with Blackburn as prisoner was slow, but without incident. Word of his capture spread quickly through the territory, and at each town they passed, people emerged to witness the once powerful cattle baron in chains. Some spat at him, others simply watched in silent satisfaction. For too long, Blackburn had operated above the law, his money and influence ensuring his impunity. Now, finally, justice was being served. In the territorial capital, the governor received them immediately, his expression grave as he listened to the collected testimonies against Blackburn. When Katherine told her story from her father's debt to the auction block to the attacks on the Layton ranch, the governor's face darkened with anger. "This territory is meant to be a place of opportunity and fresh starts," he declared, "not a fiefdom for men like Blackburn to terrorize the vulnerable." He turned to Layton. "You and your neighbors have done this territory a great service, Mr. Layton." "We only want peace," Layton replied simply, "and justice for those Blackburn has harmed." "You'll have it," the governor promised. "I'll see to it personally that Blackburn faces the full extent of the law." As they left the governor's office, Layton took Katherine's hand. "Are you ready to go home?" Home. The word still filled her with wonder. "Yes," she said softly. "I'm ready." The return journey to the ranch was lighter, unburdened by the shadow that had hung over them for so long. They rode side by side, talking of the future, of plans for the ranch, of the life they would build together. "I was thinking," Layton said as they crossed a shallow river, the water sparkling in the sunlight, "that the east pasture would be a good place for a school." Katherine looked at him in surprise. "A school?" He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "The children from neighboring ranches have to ride too far for education. We have the land, and with your teaching background. You want me to teach?" The idea was unexpected but immediately appealing. "If you'd like to," Layton replied. "I remember you said your mother was a teacher. You mentioned once that you might have followed in her footsteps if circumstances had been different." Katherine was touched that he had remembered such a small detail from their conversations. "I'd love to teach," she admitted. "But what about the ranch? I've come to enjoy helping with the accounts and planning." "You can do both," Layton assured her. "The ranch will always be our primary concern, but building something for the community, that seems important too." "Our concern," she repeated, warmth spreading through her chest at the simple phrase that conveyed so much. Layton's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Yes, ours. If you'll have me, Katherine Armstrong, I want to make everything I have yours as well." Though they were on horseback in the middle of open country, the moment felt intensely intimate. "Xavier Layton," Katherine said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling within her, "are you proposing to me?" "Inelegantly, perhaps," he admitted with a rueful smile. "I had planned something more traditional once we returned home, but—" He shrugged. The moment felt right. "Yes," Katherine said simply. "Yes, it was inelegant. Or, yes, you'll marry me." "Both," she laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Definitely both." Layton's answering smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious features. He urged his horse closer to hers, reaching across to take her hand. "I love you, Katherine Armstrong," he said, his voice low and intense. "From the moment you stood on that auction block with your chin raised and defiance in your eyes, something in me recognized something in you. I just didn't know what it was then. And now," she asked softly, "now I know it was the beginning of everything that matters." They completed their journey home in a state of shared happiness, planning their future together. When the ranch house came into view, Katherine felt a sense of homecoming stronger than any she'd experienced since her mother's death years earlier. This place, and this man, had become her sanctuary and her strength. Mrs. Winters greeted them with obvious relief, having heard reports of the confrontation with Blackburn, but few details. When they shared their news both of Blackburn's capture and their engagement, the housekeeper's reaction was immediate and emotional. "Well, it's about time," she declared, wiping away tears even as she smiled. "I've been watching you two dance around your feelings for weeks." "Was it that obvious?" Layton asked, sounding genuinely surprised. Mrs. Winters gave him a look that spoke volumes. "To everyone but yourselves, apparently." They laughed together, the sound of shared joy filling the kitchen that had seen so much tension in recent weeks. For the first time, Katherine allowed herself to believe that happiness might not just be a temporary reprieve, but a sustainable state one she and Xavier would build together, day by day. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the territory, as did news of Blackburn's downfall. Neighbors visited to offer congratulations and to share stories of their own encounters with the cattle baron. It seemed everyone had suffered under his influence in some way, and his capture had lifted a collective burden from the community. Planning for the wedding became a welcome distraction from the legal proceedings against Blackburn. Katherine, who had owned little more than the clothes on her back when she arrived at the ranch, found herself the center of attention as Mrs. Winters and neighboring women helped prepare her trousseau. The simple ceremony was scheduled for early autumn, when the prairie would be golden with late summer light. "Are you nervous?" Mrs. Winters asked one evening, as she helped Katherine try on her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of cream-colored silk with delicate lace accents, ordered from Chicago. "About the wedding?" "No," Katherine replied honestly. "About being a good wife to Xavier." "Sometimes." The older woman patted her hand. "You already are good for him. I've worked for Mr. Layton since he first came west, and I've never seen him as happy as he's been since you arrived." "Even with all the danger and drama?" Katherine asked wryly. "Especially with all that," Mrs. Winters confirmed. "He needed someone to fight for again, to care for. After losing his family and then Sarah, he'd closed himself off. You brought him back to life." The dress fitting concluded, Katherine found herself wandering outside, drawn to the evening beauty of the ranch. She found Layton by the corral, watching a new foal frolic alongside its mother. "Beautiful, isn't she?" he asked, as Katherine joined him, slipping her arm through his. "Perfect," Katherine agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Xavier, I've been thinking about something." "That sounds ominous," he teased. "Not at all. I was thinking about names for the school. What if we called it the Sarah Miller Memorial School?" Layton turned to her, surprise and emotion mingling in his expression. "You'd want that?" "I would," Katherine said softly. "Her story deserves to be remembered, and it's because of her, in a way, that we found each other." Layton pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You continue to amaze me, Katherine Armstrong, just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more." "Soon to be Katherine Layton," she reminded him with a smile. "The best name change in history," he declared. The weeks passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. The territorial governor himself sent word that he would attend their wedding, a significant honor and a public acknowledgement of Layton's service in bringing Blackburn to justice. 3 days before the wedding, news arrived that the territorial court had sentenced Blackburn to 20 years in prison. His empire would be dissolved, his lands divided and sold. It was the final closure they had been waiting for. "It feels strange," Katherine admitted to Layton as they sat on the porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson. "To think that we might never have met if not for my father's debt to Blackburn." "Life has strange ways of bringing people together," Layton agreed, his arm around her shoulders. "I used to curse the circumstances that drove me west after losing my family. Now I see it was the path that eventually led me to you." "Do you still think about them?" Katherine asked gently. "Your wife and son?" "Every day," he admitted. "I always will. But the grief has transformed. It's no longer the raw wound it once was." He looked down at her, his eyes full of tenderness. "Loving you hasn't replaced what I lost, Katherine. It's shown me that my heart had room for more love than I ever imagined possible." On their wedding day, the ranch was transformed. Lanterns and wildflowers decorated the yard, and chairs had been arranged facing an arch woven with prairie blooms. Neighbors and friends from throughout the territory gathered to witness their union, creating a celebration larger than either had anticipated. As Katherine prepared in her room, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Winters entered, carrying a small wooden box. "This came for you," she said, handing it to Katherine, "from the governor's office." Curious, Katherine opened the box to find a delicate gold locket. Inside was a note in unfamiliar handwriting. Miss Armstrong, this belonged to my sister, Sarah. She would have wanted you to have it on your wedding day. Thank you for bringing her killer to justice and for honoring her memory. May your marriage be blessed with the happiness she never found. James Miller. Tears welled in Katherine's eyes as she fastened the locket around her neck. It felt right to carry this small piece of Sarah with her, as she married the man who had tried so hard to protect them both. The ceremony itself was simple but profound. Standing before their community, Katherine and Xavier exchanged vows that acknowledged both the unusual beginning of their relationship and the deep love that had grown from it. I take you not as a possession, but as a partner, Xavier vowed, his voice strong and sure. Equal in all things, cherished above all others. I choose you freely and completely, Katherine responded, her heart full as she looked into the eyes of the man who had saved her in every way that mattered. My protector, my friend, my love. Their kiss sealed promises that both knew would be kept for a lifetime. As they turned to face their cheering friends and neighbors, Katherine felt a profound sense of rightness. From auction block to altar, her journey had been unexpected, dangerous, and ultimately perfect. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. As the evening waned, Xavier led Katherine away from the festivities, toward their home, now truly theirs together. "Happy, Mrs. Layton?" he asked softly as they walked arm in arm. "Happier than I ever thought possible, Mr. Layton," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "Then my greatest wish has been granted," he said, stopping to look at her in the moonlight. "To see you smile without shadows in your eyes." Katherine reached up to touch his face gently. "The shadows are gone for both of us now. Replaced by a future brighter than either of us could have imagined," Xavier agreed, lowering his head to kiss her again, a kiss of promise, of passion, and of the profound love that had blossomed from the most unlikely of beginnings. 5 years later, Katherine stood on the porch of the Layton Ranch, watching her husband approach on horseback, with their 3-year-old son perched in front of him. James Xavier Layton, named for Sarah's brother, and his father squealed with delight as the horse trotted into the yard. "Mama!" he called, waving enthusiastically. "We saw buffalo." "Did you now?" Katherine replied, smiling at her son's excitement. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a daughter, she was certain grew strong and active. Xavier dismounted, lifting James down before approaching Katherine. His kiss was as tender as ever, his hand joining hers over their unborn child. "How are my girls today?" he asked softly. "Impatient to meet you," Katherine replied with a smile. "Both of us." From inside the house came the sound of Mrs. Winters calling James for his lunch. The boy scampered off, leaving his parents a moment of privacy. "I passed the school on my way back," Xavier said, his arm around Katherine's waist as they walked toward the house. "Miss Johnson says enrollment is up to 27 children now." The Sarah Miller Memorial School had opened 3 years earlier, with Katherine as its first teacher. Though her pregnancy had temporarily placed her teaching duties in Miss Johnson's capable hands, she remained deeply involved in the school's operation. "We'll need to consider adding another classroom soon," she mused, "and perhaps hiring a second teacher permanently." "Already planning," Xavier assured her. "The lumber should arrive next month." Inside the house, they found James chattering happily to Mrs. Winters about the buffalo he'd seen. At 74, the housekeeper remained a vital part of their household and James's honorary grandmother. Later that evening, after James was tucked into bed with stories of buffalo and brave cowboys, Katherine and Xavier sat on the porch watching the stars emerge. It had become their nightly ritual, this quiet time together, to reflect on the day and plan for tomorrow. "I received a letter today," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. "From James Miller." Katherine sat up straighter, intrigued. They maintained a regular correspondence with Sarah's brother, who had settled in California after his sister's killer was brought to justice. "He's getting married," Xavier continued, unfolding the letter. "Asked if we might attend the wedding in San Francisco this autumn." "That's wonderful news," Katherine said warmly. "Do you think we could make the journey with the children?" Xavier smiled at her use of the plural, Their daughter would be nearly 6 months old by autumn, old enough for careful travel. "I think we could," he agreed. "It would be good for James to see more of the world. And I'd like to meet the woman who captured James Miller's heart." Katherine leaned against her husband, contentment washing through her. Who would have thought, 5 years ago, that life could be this good, that we would have created all this together? "I knew," Xavier said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The moment you agreed to come with me instead of staying with Blackburn, the moment you chose to trust me, despite every reason not to, I knew we could build something extraordinary together. Even though I was just a woman you purchased at auction," she teased gently. "Especially because you were never just anything," he corrected her. "You were always Katherine, brave, brilliant, beautiful Katherine, who happened to be standing on an auction block when I found her." The baby kicked strongly beneath their joined hands, as if emphasizing her father's words. Katherine laughed softly. "I think she agrees with you," she said. "Smart girl," Xavier replied with a smile. "Takes after her mother." As darkness settled fully around them and the prairie night came alive with sounds, they remained together on the porch, planning their journey to San Francisco, discussing the school expansion, and simply enjoying the quiet miracle of their shared life. From the ashes of tragedy, they had built something beautiful, a family, a community, a legacy of love and justice that would endure long after them. What had begun with a desperate purchase at an auction had transformed into the most precious gift either could have imagined: a life shared, challenges faced together, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. And as the stars wheeled overhead, marking the passage of time in their eternal dance, Xavier and Katherine Layton held each other close, grateful for the twisted path of fate that had brought them together, and the courage they had found in each other to forge a future brighter than their pasts. In the years that followed, the Layton Ranch prospered, becoming a cornerstone of the community that grew around it. The Sarah Miller Memorial School expanded to 3 classrooms, educating the children of ranchers, farmers, and the small town that developed nearby. Katherine divided her time between teaching, managing the ranch accounts, and raising their growing family, finding fulfillment in each role. Their daughter, Elizabeth Sarah Layton, arrived safely that autumn, a strong-willed child with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. The family journey to San Francisco for James Miller's wedding became the first of many adventures they would share, exposing their children to a world beyond the Dakota Territory, and instilling in them the same values of justice, compassion, and courage that defined their parents' lives. Central City eventually renamed itself Layton in recognition of the family's contributions to the region's development and prosperity. The dark days of Blackburn's reign faded into history, preserved only in stories told to remind younger generations of the importance of standing against tyranny and protecting the vulnerable. And through it all, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, Xavier and Katherine's love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. What had begun in the shadow of an auction block had blossomed into a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come. For Katherine, who had once faced the terrifying prospect of being sold to a man with blood on his hands, life had taken the most unexpected turn when a cowboy had said those simple, life-changing words, "You're coming with me instead." It had been the beginning of everything.